I was going to start somewhere else, but Tim brought up the defensemen, some of the injuries around the league. I know Cody Ceci, you got your own issues with him. Yeah. Big picture with the deadline not that far away, how much does that complicate things for someone in your position who could also probably use a blue liner between now and February 24th?
I think it complicates things pretty significantly. This is a year where if you, I don't want to bore you guys or your viewers and listeners, but it might be something more for one of the insiders there to break down. But because of the cap space situation in the league, there's quite a few teams that are in LTI with regards to their salary cap and using the long-term injury to give themselves space. But when you use that, it doesn't accumulate over the years. So if any of your guys that are on long-term injured reserve are going to come back before the end of the season, you really don't have that space to bring other players in between now and the deadline. So you're kind of, you referenced Calgary, and I've seen the news there, unfortunately for them. Who knows how long he'll be out, and we're the same with Ceci and Rielly, right? You presumably have their space to use, but you don't know whether you can use it because you're going to need that space to bring them back if and when they're healthy. So it's going to probably be pretty touch and go, I would project, up until the deadline, and teams will be trying to get reports on their guys when they may be back, if at all, before they can determine whether they can use that salary cap space.
So what does that mean for Morgan Rielly? You touched on it today, and you didn't go too far down the line, but reading between the lines, how much of a fear is it that he won't be ready to come back at any point this season?
I don't think. I think that just because of the timeline, it'll be very close, right? So he was injured in Florida January 12th, off the top of my head, and the injury is a minimum of 8 weeks, and he doesn't have his first time that he gets his cast off, and they'll do another scan and see how the foot is healing. So we won't really know until then whether it's healing on time or it's early or it's delayed. And so what it would mean is that he's on long-term injured reserve, but you can presumably use the space, but once you use the space, if you don't have those other dollars available on long-term injury, like you can't just fill it with Morgan Rielly when he's healthy. Like it doesn't double your cap space. It's binary. It's either you have it or you don't. So if we were to get news, so there's really not a win in this situation, because if Morgan wasn't going to be back, that's not good for us. And if we had his space, we're just going to have to go out and find somebody else, presumably, if we had that. So, what it means is that, and I think there's a lot of teams in this situation because of injuries and because of their salary cap situation, that what that will mean is that they'll be probably taking it down to the wire and getting reports on how long their players are going to be out for before they determine what, or if anything, they can bring in at the deadline.
I find that remarkably interesting, and I think the folks that watch this show find it interesting. I don't think it needs to be the deep dive with the insider guys.
You're in the right place, sir, Kyle. Trust me.
That is definitely interesting stuff. And presumably you want a guy like Rielly back before the playoffs start anyway, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, he's such a vital player for us, and has been for so long, not only on the ice but off. And so, like I was saying, if you had news that his recovery was slowed down, that wouldn't be optimal for us either. So, our hope is that at his next checkup we get good news, and we could view him in effect as a trade deadline acquisition, because he could be back. We hope he would be back shortly thereafter. If it's going to be a little bit longer, then we'll have to kind of further examine all of our options that are available and go from there.
Kyle Dubas joining us here on Tim and Sid. So let's talk about the actual trade, Campbell and Clifford. How long was that been in the works, Kyle?
We talked. You go through the year and kind of talk to every team and check in with them and see where they're at. And I think as the season kind of goes along, different teams start to form their strategy and what they want to do. So we had started talking to them and talked to them throughout the year, but in the last week or so, amplified things and on both Campbell and Clifford, and then we're able to create a package that satisfied what Los Angeles was looking to do, and also from our end what we were looking to do yesterday during the day and into the evening.
In hindsight, do you wish you had done something like this a little earlier?
I think any time that you can improve the team, you want to do it as soon as you can, right? Even going back to the summer or earlier in the season. If you're going to pay out assets, I think you'd rather be able to utilize the players that you have coming back for a greater portion of your schedule. And in Campbell's case, he's not a rental. He's got this year on his contract, and then he's got 2 more years after that. So that's a little bit different. But in the case of Clifford, sure. I mean, he's unrestricted at the end of the year. We'll see where that whole thing goes as he gets settled in here. But the longer you could have the players, I just think it's logical to think that yes, if we could do these types of things earlier, we would like to. But it's unfortunately the way the season and then the deadline approaching goes. They usually don't start to shake loose until an hour later.
If Freddie Anderson doesn't get hurt Monday night, do you think this happens this week, Kyle?
I would say so. Yes, I think it would likely have continued to go that way. Would be the way that I would have viewed it, and just the way that the conversation was going with LA. I think once he did get hurt, it certainly creates. As I talked about earlier today with the media at Ford Performance Center, it just creates that anxiety when you're relying on one player and that player gets injured. And there's lots of positions like that in sports, whether it's a quarterback or starting pitcher, goalie, whomever. It's such a hard one. I know teams in hockey have kind of shifted to go to more of the tandem style. We're fortunate that we have Fred, who is a bona fide number 1 goalie. But you always have that in the back of your mind. What if he gets hurt, and what are we going to do? Throughout the year, Michael had the difficult start to the year, then he'd really rebounded well, but it was always something in the back of our mind that if even for whether it was something like a Campbell or someone more depth related, we had kind of explored everything, and we're moving towards probably making something happen before the deadline.
Leafs GM Kyle Dubas here on Tim and Sid on Sportsnet and Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I guess you just answered this question just now, Kyle. Forgive me, but I do repeat myself sometimes. Any clue on a timeline for Freddie Anderson? And I know I'm putting you in a bad spot because it's a really tricky injury, but your fan base is kind of freaking out right now.
I think that's to be expected. I think any passionate fan base when a key player gets hurt, so whether it's Fred Anderson or someone similar, whether it's in Toronto, outside Toronto, when the fans care and a key player that they know his talent goes out, they kind of have a freak out, and that's part of what makes sports great and what keeps us all rolling along. So Fred skated today. I haven't had an update yet from the conclusion of that this afternoon. He skated later this afternoon, so I would expect sometime tomorrow, probably with Sheldon's availability after the skate and in the morning, we'll have a greater update on Fred, but certainly good news and good to see him back on the ice today. And I think with, as we said on Monday, the night of the injury, because of his importance to us and his capability, the long term will always reign supreme in terms of our decision making with Fred.
So when it comes to Jack Campbell, I know you have a bit of a history with him in the Sioux. Are you comfortable with him playing a bulk or a chunk of games here if you need him to?
Yeah, I think he's shown the capability over the last 2 seasons, notably last season, and especially as the season has rolled along this year, that he's capable of shouldering a good portion of the games, and so for us it'll give us great confidence to roll him out as often as needed here in the short term, and then in the long run be able to spell Fred more and have the two of them work in tandem and challenge one another in that way and work together. But if in the short term we need him to roll with it, I think we're confident, and especially after the initial settling in period, and as he gets used to the way that we play in front of him and our systems and how they may be different in terms of his reads of plays and saves that he has to make here versus LA, and what those differences may be, and he settles in. I think it'll be a good fit, and I think the exciting part for us with him is that he's locked in for term, so it's not one of these things where there's going to be a lot of consternation about how does he play between now and the end of the year, and is this going to be a lingering question moving ahead. We know he's going to be there. We know Fred's here as well, and we'll hopefully continue to roll along with the two of them.
Okay, I want to talk about the other guy quickly, and I know that Kyle Clifford is a bit of an analytical darling, especially for a guy of his size that plays the way he does. But does the addition of the sandpaper and grit part that Kyle Clifford brings suggest that you felt like you needed to add something that many of your fans have been saying that you guys need in that grit and sandpaper category?
Sure. I guess that's the question today as well, and I know it is something that there's been a lot of anxiety over. And I think one of the misconceptions is that we've actively not had players that have those elements on the team. Our way that we viewed it is we don't want to sacrifice talent, and we don't want to sacrifice our ability to play, and we don't want to have to hide somebody and play them very minimally throughout the game. And we wanted to make sure we found the right player that could fit our system in the way that we wanted to play. The issue with that is that those players now they don't come in real surplus, and they're hard to track down and find. And that's why when you hear some of them are available and you hear some of the prices thrown around, it's because they're so scarce. And that even going back into the junior ranks and in the draft, and I think players can develop those elements of competitiveness and physicality, but there aren't a whole lot of players like that coming up, really. And so when we had the chance to add Kyle to this discussion, it was sort of, for us, we felt a good fit. It was something that we needed in terms of how competitive he was, his experience, and in the playoffs and with the 2 Stanley Cups in Los Angeles, but also the fact that we feel confident that we can put him out there. He can go up and down the lineup as needed, and he's just going to do his job. And if there are things that happen on the ice, he's got the experience and how to deal with them and help our guys. So it's not about fighting. It's not about anything like that. I think it's just about his presence and his work ethic on and off the ice that we think will be a good fit and start to address something that I would agree. It has been something that we've lacked, and it's been exposed at times. And I know we have the reputation that we don't really want that, but we do so long as the player can go out and play. And I know that those players aren't overly available. So when we had the chance here today, we tried to strike, and we're excited to see them both tomorrow.
Yeah, they become very valuable.
You're a point out of the playoffs, man. And there is this frenzy going on. Obviously, listen, Frederik Anderson's important. We all get that. However, when you look at the math, it's not that bad. Is that just the way life goes as GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs at times? How do you absorb that, Kyle?
I think I understand why everyone gets. I think especially in the last month we had the stretch right before the break where we played really, really well coming out of the game against the Islanders early January. Then we had the 2 weeks before the break where we had 5 of 6 at home, and we didn't play to our expectation or the way that we can. So that sent us into the break on a really bad note. We woke up out of the break. We were 4 points out of the playoffs, and I think it set a clear message to our players that the time is now, and we have more to give, and we have to give more. And then we came out of the break, and through 2 periods against Florida, if you go to the 2 games on the road, Nashville, Dallas, we played really well, and then against Ottawa, it was a grind, and they played very well against us, and we were able to find a way to win. And then you can get so caught up in what's just happened and lose sight of the long game. And since Sheldon's been in, I look at this today before I went down for the media with the 2 players, and we're tied for 5th in the league in points percentage. And if we can and I think we still have more to give beyond that. And if we can just continue to keep our heads level and go through this test that we've put ourselves into, I think it's going to be a great thing in the long run for our players. I talked earlier today about the Raptors and the fact that they've won 12 in a row, and they can play any way you want, and they can find a way to win. They can get up and protect the lead. They can be down by nearly 40 points and come back and win, and they've got a real competitiveness and spirit to them. But they also have the scars from 4, 5, 6 years ago that made them into what they are today. And it doesn't just happen overnight. It's years in the making usually, and we've already been through a few of those years and have some of those scars. But how we go through this, I think, will really benefit our whole program in the long run. And it's just being able to keep marching on as the public and even some people internally perhaps get a little bit frantic about where we're at, and just keep doing what we've been doing in the last number of months here and start to eliminate some of the poor performances and poor moments from our game and start to really grow. Because I think when we do that and we continue to go through these types of experiences, we're really going to see some growth in our group and in our program and start to go to the heights that I think we're capable of.